Question. I call the member for Gippsland.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And enjoying the debate on the Social Security Amendment National Green Jobs Corps Supplement Bill 2009, I'd like to state my overall support for the program that's been announced by the government. I suppose there's no surprise in that regard, considering the opposition implemented a very similar, almost identical system when it was in government as a work experience and training system. Apart from that, Deputy Speaker, there's a few key points I'd like to make as part of my contribution to this debate. The first is to state quite clear this is not a green jobs program as the government has attempted to spin it in the wider community. It is a work experience and a training initiative. And secondly, to make the point that more needs to be done to address the rising tide of youth unemployment in my electorate and throughout regional Australia. And finally, I'd like to make the point this government has to stop the rhetoric about the green jobs and actually start investing in the people who are doing the practical environmental work in our region right now, those being the land care facilitators and coordinators who face an uncertain future under this government's quite euphemistically named Caring for Our Country policy. Deputy Speaker, I'll begin with the details of the bill before the House. And the bill amends the Social Security Act of 1991 to allow a training supplement of $41.60 per fortnight to be paid to participants in the program who receive New Start allowance, youth allowance or other parenting payments. And from January next year, the program will allow for up to 10,000 young people to develop skills in environmental projects through 26 weeks of accredited training and work experience. And these words have been taken from the Parliamentary Secretary for Employment's second reading speech. So it's no question that it is a work experience and a training program. It's simply not a jobs initiative as the government has tried to portray it in the community. Having said that, Deputy Speaker, I am a strong supporter of work experience within my community, particularly for the longer-term unemployed. I think it's important to give young people the opportunity to develop their skills. Just as important, though, Deputy Speaker, is to create a work ethic for those people who have not necessarily had that opportunity, the discipline of getting up and going to work on a daily basis, the pride that it gives them from actually contributing something important to our community through an initiative like a Green Corps program is something that I think the government is quite right in pursuing. And as I said, it was an initiative of the previous government, which from my experience, was very successful in the broader Gippsland community. It does give purpose to young people's lives while they're looking for more permanent work. And also, just as I said earlier, Deputy Speaker, it makes them feel part of the community, that they are actually making a contribution. And that's one of the most important aspects of these style of programs. But in terms of actual employment outcomes, I fear that the Green Jobs Corps, as it's portrayed, is actually more spin than real job outcomes at the end of it. It remains to be seen whether we ever actually see this turn into real jobs, and as I'll indicate later, given the government's cut to land care funding, I have doubts about the government's commitment to practical environmental work in a paid capacity. The sort of work experience that the young people receive is going to be critical to the success of the program. It depends entirely upon the quality of the projects that are put forward by the community, and also the approach taken by the department and the minister in terms of what they actually approve. And I hope there's going to be a rigorous commitment to real environmental initiatives and not some Mickey Mouse projects that don't actually achieve environmental outcomes. But I'm referring to the Parliamentary Secretary's second reading speech, where he indicates that the type of work experience and training projects will be along the lines of bush regeneration, erosion control, developing community information education projects, beach and dune rehabilitation, habitat protection. And he goes on to say these projects will make environmental improvements now and help develop green skills that will increasingly be needed in the labour market of the future. Participants in the National Green Jobs Corps will undertake work experience and skill development, including 130 hours of accredited training leading to a nationally recognised qualification. So it is positive to see, Deputy Speaker, that the young people will emerge from this program with a nationally recognised qualification, and that is a definite step forward for the program participants. In addition to doing something positive for their communities, the participants will actually become more employable at the conclusion if the program meets the guidelines as pointed out by the Parliamentary Secretary. But as I said at the outset, Deputy Speaker, the rising tide of youth unemployment is a major concern in Gippsland and throughout regional Australia. The member for Boothby and Shadow Minister highlighted these concerns during his contribution to the debate on the bill before us, and he correctly pointed out that youth unemployment is not receiving anywhere near the attention it deserves to receive in our community. The rate of unemployment for teenagers who are not in full-time education has risen to 18.5% in 2009, and that's up from 12.2% in 2008. And I fear that the rate in Gippsland and the Latrobe Valley is actually much higher, and also we have a concern in my community, Deputy Speaker, that the youth unemployment rate is hidden to a large extent because so many of our young people who can't find work in our communities are actually forced to move away to seek opportunities in larger cities. So the youth unemployment rate is actually hidden to a large extent in regional areas. The Shadow Minister made some very good points in his address when pointed out that around 295,000 young Australians who are not in full-time education, are not in the labour force, or are unemployed. And I'll just quote from his speech. What we do know is that those people who do not make a good transition from school, who spend periods outside the labour force, not in full-time education and unemployed, will have a very intermittent work history throughout life. So youth unemployment is an area that needs a lot more attention from the Rudd government. All of those young Australians who voted for Kevin 07 2 years ago would never have dreamed how much their opportunities would dry up under this government. We see that the Rudd Labor government has no strategy to create actual jobs for young Australians. And that is a real concern in my community, Deputy Speaker. And the Green Jobs Corps initiative, while I welcome it as a positive step, it does need to go a lot further, or the government does need to go a lot further in terms of its strategy for youth unemployment. This is very much a green work experience program. It is not a jobs program, as I indicated previously. That's not to say that it won't do a good deal of work in the community, or have the potential to do a great deal of good work in the community. But I urge the government to stop trying to spin everything that it puts out there and actually just let the results speak for themselves. If the program works, the community will embrace it, and it'll look for an extension of it in the years ahead. I spoke quite recently in the House, Deputy Speaker, about my concerns relating to youth unemployment in Gippsland in a broader sense, and the lack of the support services which exist for young people. And right at this stage, I'm actually seeking clarification from the Minister in relation to allegations of cuts to Centrelink funding for specialised youth workers who assist the long-term unemployed in regional areas like Gippsland. Because youth unemployment is very much a specialist area, Deputy Speaker, as I'm sure you're aware, in your own community. You need to build trust, and you need to build trust with the young people themselves, and there's a lot of one-to-one support to help them through whatever issues they may have in their lives beyond just the need to secure work. And they can be quite high-maintenance clients for the Centrelink staff in terms of getting them to turn up to programs or getting them to actually apply for jobs and getting them back engaged in the community. A lot of them have dropped out of school for a whole variety of reasons, and there often are some underlying social issues involved. So I urge the government to ensure that funding is provided to support this specialised assistance which is required for young unemployed people, particularly in regional areas. Because if we lose these young people at a young age, we actually lose them for life, and we have a real problem in parts of my electorate where we have generations of welfare dependency, where the young people have not had the opportunity to see a positive role model, getting up and going to work every day, and it becomes very difficult to break that cycle. So I think there is potential with a program like the Green Jobs Corps to actually start breaking that cycle, getting young people engaged and developing those work ethics I referred to earlier. And Deputy Speaker, just in terms of the eligibility criteria of the Green Jobs Corps program, I do have some concerns about the quite restricted nature of the eligibility criteria and the fact there will not be jobs available necessarily into this work experience unless the government actually changes its policy direction in relation to the practical environmental work, which I'll refer to again later on. The criteria of 18 to 24-year-olds, and I think there's 10,000 places in the initial announcement, I don't believe will go far enough in the longer term. So I'd encourage the government to consider that with the likelihood of the community embracing this initiative, that there's going to be need to extend it and probably extend the eligibility criteria as well. One area that I'm particularly concerned about, Deputy Speaker, is the possibility where the government can consider special exemptions to broadening the criteria for newly arrived immigrants. We have a situation in Gippsland and Latrobe Valley at the moment where we have quite a strong influx in recent times of Sudanese refugees. It's a situation where a lot of them have been processed, have moved to Australia, have had their first move to a suburban area and not enjoyed the experience, have heard that there's housing available, particularly in the Latrobe Valley, and have made that move only to find there's not much work available for them there. The availability of affordable housing has been the carrot, if you like, but when they've arrived, they've found that there's not a great deal of employment opportunities. So I fear that we have a situation brewing in Gippsland and Latrobe Valley which can be of significant social and economic concern to our wider community. These people are ready, willing and able to work, but we need to help them take that first step and get some practical experience of working in the Australian environment. And I think the one real opportunity for them, maybe a program along these lines of a green jobs initiative where there's some supported training to allow them, first of all, to get out into the community and meet people, which is always difficult when you've just relocated to a whole new community. And there's some real opportunities here, I think, to build some positive spirit within the community directed towards the refugee population, in the sense that if they're seen to be out in the community doing some positive and practical environmental work in this case, it will be well received by the broader Gippsland and Latrobe Valley community. Keep in mind, Deputy Speaker, that there's large sections of my community are recovering from the bushfires from earlier this year, and the bushfire rehabilitation task is enormous, and to the government's credit, there has been some additional funding allocated for some projects in that regard. But I think that there needs to be a recognition that the Sudanese community in this case is going to need some specialised assistance to integrate into the Latrobe Valley community, and I think this is one area where the government could look at the eligibility criteria of the Green Jobs Corps, look at the age criteria as well, and perhaps look at whether there's an opportunity to expand the criteria and to provide that level of intensive assistance, which I think the Sudanese community in particular is going to need in the months and years ahead as they become established and go on to become highly valued and much respected members of our broader community. As we all appreciate, Deputy Speaker, the key to settling into regional communities is the decency of a job and being able to pay your own bills and afford your own home. And that is one area where I think we're letting down these new settlers to our region. We haven't been able to provide them with the work that they so desperately want. So we have many opportunities in my region for the Green Job Corps, and I think that the government has some real opportunities to work closely with the state government in particular, which has made an absolute mess of its funding of public land management, to leverage off any available projects with the state government in partnership to undertake some important environmental initiatives, perhaps with a commercial focus too in some of our state and national parks where the tourism infrastructure is so poor. There's been many years of neglect of the public land in the Gippsland region, and while I've spoken about the Sudanese community and their capacity to be involved in the Gippsland, in particular in the Latrobe Valley area, further east in the East Gippsland area, there's real opportunities to focus a green jobs program like this on our Indigenous community, where the unemployment rate is way beyond the state and national average. The classic example close to home for me in Lakes Entrance is the Lake Tyers Forest Park on the outskirts of the Lakes Entrance township, and the condition of the park facilities there is appalling, Deputy Speaker. And there's been a lack of funding by the state government over many years, and I think there's an opportunity here to work in partnership though with the state government and the Green Jobs Corps and our Indigenous community in the Lake Tyers area to really link this program together to again build some positive spirit within our community, to have these long-term unemployed people gainfully engaged in the community and carrying out some work which has some benefits to the broader community. There is a natural link, I believe, within our Indigenous community to the land. They have a great affinity with some of the projects they've undertaken in the past in my region, and there's an opportunity that we can use that natural affinity to the advantage of the community and to the benefit of the Indigenous people themselves. But as I said earlier, Deputy Speaker, it's so important that what comes out of this Green Jobs Corps program actually leads to real work at the completion of the training phase. So apart from the eligibility criteria, Deputy Speaker, I'm concerned the government is really in the process of downgrading its support for practical environmental work in general through its Caring for Our Country program. There is a very strong link between these two initiatives. When you consider the Green Corps is directed at such areas as bush regeneration, erosion control, developing community information education projects and habitat protection. And when you read that list of projects that the Green Jobs Corps is going to be focused on, it sounds a lot like Landcare. And this government is in the process of gutting Landcare by its refusal to provide guaranteed funding for the network of Landcare facilitators and coordinators who support the more than 100,000 volunteers across the nation. Now, this Green Corps initiative is talking about 10,000 work experience program participants, and these are volunteers who are unemployed and they need a helping hand, and I fully support that. But the government is also, at the same time, refusing to talk about its lack of support for the 100,000 volunteers involved in more than 4,000 community groups across the nation through the Landcare movement. There is a growing awareness in our community, Deputy Speaker, that the government talks a lot about its green credentials, but when it comes to rolling up the sleeves and getting the job done, digging the holes, planting the trees, fencing off riverbanks, controlling feral animals, undertaking the erosion protection work. When it comes to that hard, physical, practical environmental work, the government goes missing in action. And I'd like to quote from a letter in the Snowy River Mail from November the 4th. It's from Dawn Parker, the Far East Victoria Landcare Secretary. And Dawn makes some very strong points in relation to where she sees the government's commitment in relation to environmental projects. And I quote, "Both the potential for practical environmental works and the health and vitality of rural communities are being damaged by the cuts to the number of landcare facilitators across Victoria. The role of group facilitators was to be in close contact with local communities to encourage and enable their engagement in natural resource management activities." She goes on to say, "Recognising the role of volunteers in achieving significant environmental services, successive federal governments invested directly in supplementing volunteer input by funding some paid staff and leveraged even greater attainments. Every government dollar invested in support personnel returns at least $3 more from local input and co-contributions. The Caring for Our Country business plan endorsed by Messrs Burke and Garrett is undermining the core functioning capacity of Landcare. Over 50% of Victorian facilitator positions have been lost and more are to go. Whether by design or through incompetence, the vital network of support staff has been effectively dismantled, and many Landcare volunteers will reduce their input as their access to information and resources diminish. Was this what Tony Burke and Peter Garrett intended? If these outcomes are accidental, how soon will they be undone?" And it goes on to say that genuine consultation with local communities is needed without bureaucratic intervention. Repair is needed now. And I recommend the ministers responsible get a copy of that particular edition of the Snowy River Mail and get an understanding of what Dawn's referring to, because she speaks on behalf of many people throughout regional communities who are terribly concerned about this government's lack of commitment to Landcare. Now, Deputy Speaker, whenever members on this side of the House criticise a government program, we're accused of scaremongering or that we simply don't understand what's proposed. And I can assure you, though, that the Gippsland's small army of Landcare volunteers and professional workers understand what's happening to them. And also, just refer to another quote from the East Gippsland Landcare Network, and I'm happy to provide a copy of this to the ministers so they can read it in their entirety. "The Landcare support staff across the country are losing their jobs due to the Australian government's Caring for Our Country grants not funding community facilitation and support. This is because the Caring for Our Country grants, which Landcare support staff have traditionally relied on, did not allocate any funding to the community skills, knowledge and engagement section of their business plan, even though it's stated as a priority of investment in the business plan. Landcare networks and groups that were not lucky enough to be included in the CMA regional core funding had to submit applications in the national competitive section of the fund scheme. Out of approximately 1,300 applications to the government across Australia, only 57 were funded, leaving many Landcare groups with no funding for on-ground run projects, let alone to support groups." Deputy Speaker, it goes on, and the time escapes me from going into the full details of the East Gippsland Landcare Network submission. But the link to the Green Jobs Corps bill before us is obvious. There will simply be no jobs in practical environmental work for these young people in the future unless the government changes its policies. It is a cruel hoax to get these young people involved and interested in practical environmental work through Green Corps, while at the same time we're cutting funding for professional staff involved in Landcare. And these Landcare volunteers do a mountain of work in my electorate, but the paid support staff are very much the glue which holds it all together. They provide the project management advice and assistance, they provide technical advice to landholders, they generate newsletters to keep everyone informed, they apply for grants and make sure the money is spent according to the guidelines, and they also promote environmental sustainability. They're probably the same people the government's going to rely on to be the training coordinators for the Green Corps program in the first place. But right now they're in the process of trying to fight for their own jobs under the facilitation and coordination roles they play with Landcare. So the Landcare volunteers and the professional staff who've contacted me have expressed their fears that Landcare groups will not be able to function the same way in the future without guaranteed funding for professional facilitators and coordinators. And it's a concern that I share, and I'll be tabling a petition in the near future on behalf of my community. And last week, Deputy Speaker, more than 200 people rallied in Orbost to raise their concerns, and they initiated a petition, and the petition, which is in the process of being signed throughout the Gippsland electorate at the moment, calls on the House of Representatives to immediately reinstate the funding of local Landcare facilitators and coordinators in order to allow Landcare groups to function effectively and to address the Caring for Our Country priority of community skills, knowledge and engagement. If the Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry thinks that he can ignore these concerns, I think he's in for one hell of a shock, Deputy Speaker. There's more than, as I said, 100,000 volunteers around Australia, more than 4,000 community groups, and the anger is growing throughout the community. The Minister knows about these concerns. I've written to him about it months ago, and I've raised the issue in the media and in the House before. He is defending the government's decision on the ground that he has the right to set national environmental policies, priorities, regardless of community concerns. I think that the Minister needs to appreciate that you have people on the ground come out with local solutions to local problems, and they are engaged in the process of practical environmental work, and they should have that opportunity to make sure that those projects are undertaken. So I urge the government to make sure it doesn't make the same mistake of its Green Jobs Corps program.